Jay, welcome again. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Frank. Nice to meet you, Sam.
Nice to meet you too, Jay.
Sam, thank you for joining us. And so let me give our listeners a brief introduction to Captain Sam Bryant, U.S. Navy. Recently retired from the U.S. Navy after 27 years of dedicated service, which is just amazing. Captain Sam Bryant is a native of Ithaca, New York, and he graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1997, earning a BS in English, of all things. And following his initial carrier qualification aboard the USS Harry S. Truman carrier, he was designated a naval aviator in December of 1999. He has accumulated over 3,500 flight hours and 350 carrier-assisted landings in 6 different type model series aircraft. I should add one other thing to the introduction. Sam, I've known Sam for about 20 years now. He is the husband of my wife's cousin, so he's technically family. So Sam, thank you for joining us. All right, I guess my first question to you, Sam, and I'm going to start here because it just kind of seems appropriate in my head. So in 1986, the movie Top Gun came out. And you were probably at a fairly impressionable age in 1986.
Mhm.
What influence did that movie have on your decision to go into the Navy and into naval aviation? And it may have no influence. And so I guess my larger question is, what got you started on this career path?
Well, I would definitely say Top Gun did have a huge influence on myself and a large part of the generation on, hey, it's cool to be a jet pilot or a Navy pilot. Um, and incidentally, later on, towards the end of my career, I actually got to meet Tom Cruise when he put out Top Gun Maverick 2 when he came.
Did you really? Oh,
Well,
that's cool.
he actually, I took Rebecca to the premiere here in North Island, and he came to kick it off before he gave it to Hollywood, and he was actually pretty nervous because he's in a room full of naval aviators,
Oh, I bet.
putting out the Top Gun Maverick for the first time, and I think he kind of felt the palpable feeling from the audience was, this better not suck, Tom. So we've been waiting 25 years for this. So yeah, but that movie was definitely something that sparked my interest. I think I also, my dad, he was an aviator in the Army. He was actually an Army helicopter pilot in Vietnam. And my first memory of really being interested in flying was when I was rooting around in the attic as kids do, looking for treasure, and I came across a box that had his flight helmet in it. He still had his flight helmet from the helicopter in Vietnam. One of those big white helmets with the visor that comes down. And I remember taking that out and thinking, "Wow, this is cool." And really kind of occurred to me, like, "Wow, my dad was a pilot," and I wanted to learn more about that. And so I think my dad was probably the biggest influence initially in wanting to fly. Um, but initially, I also had an interest in being a Navy SEAL too. So that was another career path I was considering in the Navy. And I did a lot of thinking about what school I wanted to go to and how I could get into the Navy. And I initially thought I was going to look at hometown Cornell University, but then I found out about the Naval Academy and was just kind of bore sighted on that. So that's what got me really started in on the pipeline of a Navy career.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm curious, did your dad talk to you about his time
he did.
in
Yeah, he definitely experienced some PTSD from Vietnam, but it manifested in a different way. He could talk about it, but I think it also just made him, it was definitely a tough time for that entire generation because they had a much different experience than my generation did with the war on terror. So
Mm, yeah.
yeah.
No, it's an interesting question. My dad was a Marine and he served, I guess, kind of in the period between the Korean and Vietnam Wars. So he wasn't in combat, and he served for 3 or 4 years or so. But I don't remember him talking to me at all about his time in the military. And actually, the same is true for my grandfather, who was a colonel in the Army for,
Hmm.
probably as long as you were in the Navy. It was certainly a part of his identity, but it wasn't a part of his identity that he shared with me. And he served during World War II and retired in the late 60s.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, when you think about when you're embarking on a career, what you want to do for a living someday, it's interesting to think back after you kind of get somewhere how you got there. And when I look back at why I joined the Navy and why I wanted to go to the Naval Academy, in a way, I think the path kind of chose me more than I chose it. I didn't really. I knew I wanted to fly. I was interested, in the Top Gun and the excitement of that. But when I think about some of the things that I did with sports, always enjoyed playing on teams. I enjoyed, in retrospect, I think I enjoyed leadership positions. I enjoyed, banding together to try to solve problems. And so, in a way, later on, I discovered that was part of the naval lifestyle that I really enjoyed the most. I definitely enjoyed flying, but I also enjoyed the leadership aspects of eventually being able to help other people with problems they were either having in their career or their life and be able to help solve that. So that's kind of a neat aspect of the job that I later discovered I just was naturally drawn to.
So when you were deciding this early on, was your father supportive of you doing that? Or
It's funny. He was a little bit apprehensive about me being in harm's way, I think, but he didn't. He was always very. I don't think he showed that as much as he could have. He was very, very supportive of me chasing my dreams,
great.
and I didn't really realize it at the time, but he was sort of training me in a way to uh, think of others and put some people's priorities ahead of my own when it came to your first thought, and so that really ended up forming the kind of leader that I was able to become later because of some of those lessons he was teaching me. I didn't even realize it at the time. So I credit him a lot with how I came out of the kiln, so to speak. I still had a lot of other people that influenced me throughout my life, but he definitely got me started on that path. And I think everybody that finds success in their career or life can look back a little bit and think, was it an obstacle they had to overcome, or was it an encouragement? And I was pretty lucky in that my dad was not an obstacle for my life. He was definitely somebody that was always he always had this saying that he's like, I'm always on your wing, which is a pilot thing. Like your wingman is always somebody that's supporting you no matter what. Even when you're alone, your wingman's over there in another plane. And so my dad was always like, hey, I'm always on your wing. And that was something that definitely resonated with me in a special relationship that I was lucky to have.
So Sam, at what point did you decide to try for the Naval Academy?
I decided in probably I think it was my freshman year in high school. I pretty much thought about it. In fact, I switched to a high school that would allow me to take some more advanced courses. The home high school I was in didn't at the time offer any advanced placement courses in the sciences, and I was really interested in science. And I also had a passion for the arts too, as you may have gathered from the English major at the in college. However, I do. It's not lost on me the subtle double entendre of a BS in English. So it's kind of an
You had to get
interesting.
that in, yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. But I mean, I still took a lot of sciences, and I can talk about that a little bit in a minute with the at the Naval Academy. That's a very classical education in a way that I think is special in a lot of colleges that you're allowed to have a very broad course of study. I would take fluid dynamics, or I would be taking chemistry, or all these other science-based courses, and then I'd run over and do my seminar course in Shakespeare. And so it's kind of a classic Greek education in a way that was pretty cool. And then a lot of my classmates, went on to be in engineering fields, or business fields, or those kind of things. So I think it really sets you up well for getting exposure to a lot of different fields of study. The Naval Academy is a pretty neat, even though it's not a true research university, the professors are there to teach. They still publish a lot, and we have a lot of like we have a real wind tunnel downstairs that they use for the aerodynamics department, and they have one of the few wave tanks for the naval architecture and ocean engineering. And so they have a wave tank down there. They're testing all kinds of different hulls and fluid dynamics in, and it's pretty fascinating to get exposed to all that stuff, even if you're not specializing in engineering, to see that stuff. And I think that really set me up well for later on in life, being able to, like I was just talking to Jay about, I didn't realize how much I'd be interacting with engineers in the aviation field as just a pilot. They wanted to know about my experience, or how this particular widget would work in my mission. So
So just to clarify for listeners who might not be familiar with the military academies, so when you graduate, are you at an officer level?
yes, so you have a job immediately on graduation. That's a good thing, plus. But the way it works is you apply to the Naval Academy. You also have to get a congressional or senatorial appointment from your congressman or senator, and that's a whole separate interview process from your typical college interview. You go before a panel of people that are appointed by the senator or congressman, and they have so many appointments based on their state representation. And then you get the appointment, and then you also have to get through the admissions process with just like any other university to get in. So both those things have to be sort of checked, and then you get in, and then you do 4 years of just like at any other university. And when you graduate, you're commissioned as an officer in the United States Navy or United States Marine Corps, and then you go on to you also at the end of when you graduate, you get through what's called service assignment night, and you interview for your type of profession you want to do in the Navy, whether it's Marines, Navy SEALs. You could be a ship driver, a submariner. You could do medicine. You can do law. It just depends on a lot of things. And then, of course, naval aviation, which I went into. So it's a
So
very broad, very broad. There's a lot of options you can go into. It's not just being a pilot.
So does
Yeah.
every branch of the military have their own academy? Well, so based on what you said, it sounds like Navy and
Yes.
is
Navy, so a lot of people don't know that the
yeah.
Marines are part of the Department of the Navy, and that's a subtle thing. So it's Department of the Navy is sort of the big umbrella, and under the Department of the Navy is the Navy and the Marine Corps. In the old days of wooden ships, they used to say wooden ships and iron men. The Marines served as soldiers aboard the ship to protect the ship,
I see.
sharpshooters and that sort of thing, and raiders. And
So similar to Frank, so when I went through high school, I feel like I wasn't exposed to any of these options at all.
uh
So how did I just find it fascinating? So how did you within the different academy options, how did you come to choose the Naval Academy versus I don't know the Air Force?
yeah, it's interesting. I visited the West Point, and I visited the Naval Academy. I didn't really visit the Air Force Academy till later. I'm not sure. I don't really have a good reason why I wasn't interested in the Air Force. It just didn't seem like it was a good fit for me for whatever reason. But I looked at West Point, and that's actually where I joke about this. This is where they filmed the Wicked Witch of the West scenes in Wizard of Oz. Were filmed at West Point.
Really?
So if you can imagine all that doom and gloom, and then you go to Annapolis, which is like right next to Baltimore and DC, and it's on the bay, and yeah, it was a whole different. So that was a bit of a selfish choice. When you look at your campus life, you want your campus to be beautiful. You want your experiences when you're away from the campus to be fun. And I wasn't thinking that West Point would be my jam as far as being able to have fun on my off duty time.
Another question about what might have been going through your mind when you were thinking about all of this. I think it's not completely true that I didn't consider military service early on, but I do remember thinking how physically challenging it was likely to be. And for whatever reason, I think that kind of worked its way into my psyche. And I just wasn't sure if I was going to be prepared enough to handle the physical element.
Yeah, you definitely have to be physically fit. The other thing though that you don't realize, and I didn't realize this, I'll kind of take a quick segue. A lot of people that
Yeah.
have no experience with the military probably get their ideas about the military through their books or Hollywood. And they think of, something like their drill sergeant in Full Metal Jacket, that movie, or they think of other things when they think of what boot camp is like in the military. And really what that's designed to do is not to belittle people. It's designed to take individuals, people that think individually, and force them to think in teams and be supportive of each other. So to the degree that things are physically challenging and mentally challenging, the idea behind the training is to break down your sense of self a little bit and give you a little more sense of how can I help the team and how can the team help me? And that's really what it's about. And that's what ends up being successful with any particular unit or person in the military. The best kinds of leaders are the ones that don't try to do it all themselves and just worry about how can I advance my personal career or my personal decorations or my accolades. It's about how you can help other people when you get to positions of leadership, but it's also if you're struggling physically in a particular task or struggling, your team comes together and helps you. We augment each other in we augment the weaknesses and enhance the good things. So everybody brings a different aspect of that, and that's why we try to recruit from a diverse background, not just ethnically diverse, but academically diverse. Some of the, like if you go to a naval aviation squadron, you'll find English majors like myself, and you'll find math majors, and you'll find people that started out. I mean, people that went to all different universities, Harvard, uh, all the Ivy Leagues, universities that I've never heard of, and they all come together and create an amazing team, and that's really special. I think that's kind of cool, and diversity of thought is really important too. So that ended up being one of the things when you back to your point about physically challenging. Yes, it was and is if you want to join the military, but you're going to have good people around you, and that's something that in other industries I've been exposed to, you can't always count on having good people around you in terms of they've got your back. And that's something I really liked about the Navy is people had my back um, more so than I've noticed in some other experiences I've had in other fields. So
So is that what you were referring to earlier, where your father was kind of training you, like what he was giving you insight into that? And so did you kind of know that going in, or was that made
I,
obvious to you while you were there?
I did, but I was a cocky little, what, going into the Navy. I mean, I was young and I had a lot of sort of hubris, if you will, and that took some time to grow to grow out of. And I think that's just part of being young, and that's the fun
Yeah.
of being young is you think you're ready to take on the world, and that's what makes you a little bit fearless, and that's probably a good thing. But as you gain a little more experience, you learn to kind of put that piece of you aside. And it's fun to meet young people that have that, to be around that, because it makes you feel young. They've got this energy that's just amazing. But we're all kind of cocky and silly when we're young and make mistakes. And I think that's one thing my dad taught me is especially is it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay. You just got to own them and move on.
Yeah.
And I kind of learned at an early age that sometimes the things that define us the most is how we move on from a mistake, not how we handle success. Because anybody can handle being lifted, up on everybody's shoulders and winning the trophy, because that's you're the center of attention and you're winning. But how do you handle when you know your team just lost in the state playoffs, or how do you handle it when you got that D on the test in college, and how do you move on from there? So that's challenging for some people, and that was a learning process for me too.
Yeah. Do you feel like while you were at the academy, there was something specific you can point to where you had a shift maybe in your attitude or your demeanor, or was that later on? Um, you know what I
I
mean?
think the biggest shift for me was I actually, everybody's got their path, how they got to the Naval Academy. Some people came directly in. In my case, I actually went to a postgraduate year after high school to get the grades I needed to get into the Naval Academy. So I didn't get in right away. I went to the Naval Academy Preparatory School in Newport, Rhode Island, where I was actually enlisted for a year in the Navy, doing purely academics and getting ready for the Naval Academy. And then I got in. So that was actually a setback. I got right out of
Yeah.
high school. I didn't get right into the 4 year college. I had to take a year of post grad to get in. And
I feel like a lot of people would quit right there, or they would just go off.
yeah,
Interesting.
and it's funny because my kids growing up, they initially, when I talk to them about adversity, they kind of joke and say, "Well, Dad, everything works out for you," and it's not that easy. And I said, "Well, hey, now, let me tell you a little more about my story. It wasn't always easy. I always joke that I've needed more time in my life to get where I am, and the often it really is the setbacks that make you into a person that's resilient, and creative in your career, because you've seen failure. If you only see success, it's it's kind of limiting in a way. um and I would encourage anybody that's seeking a career to not be afraid to try a bunch of things when you're young, especially because you've got time to make your mistakes and learn from them and try something new, and you're not a failure at that point. It's really hard to be a failure when you're 25. It's a little easier to be a failure when you're 50, but it's it's
Mm.
it's definitely a lot easier to experiment, and that's the time to do it. And I was
Yeah.
glad I was afforded a little bit of time to experience those setbacks and move on.
And then when you're in the Naval Academy, or what? Again, this is coming from a place of ignorance. Do you have a lot of opportunities to try different things, or?
Yeah, so the freshmen at the Naval Academy are required to take 21 credit hours first semester, like right out of the gate, and because you're forced to take all these different. So it's a pretty good course load, um, for a freshman out of the gate, and it's because they wanted you to get exposed to the core curriculum, but also have a lot of time to take electives and stuff. So it's a pretty good fire hose that you suddenly get thrown at you.
Want to come back really quick, Sam, to your words about success and failure and how they can both be
Mhm.
motivating. And one of the assumptions that I have about the value of the military is that there is a fairly clearly defined upward trajectory that you can see ahead of yourself. In other words, you can see that if you put in the time and the effort and are successful at it, you can move upwards in the ranks, and you can kind of reach these different milestones or deliverables. And I think that's actually really important in any profession, to be able to see this kind of vertical potential. And some fields emphasize that a little bit more clearly than others. And I'm just wondering, when you first started out, did you see that vertical potential as a ladder that you intended to climb? I mean, was that a motivating factor for you?
Yeah, I would say it started out that way. Again, because I was young and impressionable, thinking that the idea behind the military was to achieve rank. But really, what it is that when you're doing your job well, the rank kind of takes care of itself. And that's I think what I encourage when I talk to young people the most about, um, job success is, don't try to be seen. Don't try to set yourself out apart. Don't set out to set yourself apart from others or be the greatest. Set out to do something you're passionate about, and focus on just being the best version of yourself you can be. And often you'll get noticed better that way than when you're you're sort of trying to weasel your way into a position, because especially in any type of leadership team where you're trying to go towards a common goal, there's really no room for that. It ends up being counterproductive, and there's infighting, or it causes friction, or it mutes ideas because maybe somebody wants to speak up, and then you're trying to mute that person because you don't want them to look better than you. And so that's a real, if you can learn early on that being part of a winning team is better than being an individual success, you'll probably end up going further, because then you'll have all these like winning teams on your resume.
So at what point did you start focusing on aviation? Were there steps at the academy that you needed to take or took that set you up to take those steps into flying?
The way the academy works at the end is you do these when you become a senior, you do these series of interviews based on your service preferences. So if you want to be a Navy SEAL, you'd interview with the SEALs that are the SEAL officers and SEAL enlisted folks that are at the academy as faculty advisors. And if you want to be a pilot, same thing. You interview with the senior pilots on the yard, and if you want to be a surface warfare officer driving ships or a submariner, same thing. So by that time, I'd really focused on wanting to be a Navy pilot, and I went and interviewed with the senior pilots on the yard, and they kind of literally they ask you a series of character questions, and similar to this discussion, why do you want to be a Navy pilot? Why do what do you think your characteristics are that will make you successful, those kind of stuff, that kind of stuff. There is a little bit of like, hey, you got a C in aerodynamics, what do you think about that? They try to stress you out, and so and they want to see how you handle things under pressure, so that kind of, and they rack and stack and rank their interviewees, and based on that interview process, they select a certain amount of people to become Navy pilots, and then you literally sit there with an envelope on service assignment night, and you all open it up at the same time, and there's a little yellow sticky that says Navy pilot or Navy SEAL or what you're going to be. So it's kind of a surprise. And then one of the reasons, honestly, that I thought I wanted to be a SEAL at one point. My roommate actually went on to be an elite Navy SEAL. And we've kept in touch over many years. He was my best man at my wedding and all that. But it's funny, like, it just, as I said, the path kind of chooses you. As much as I think I would have done well there was just something about Navy pilot that sort of selected me.
What traits in yourself do you think have made you successful as a pilot?
I think there's a mix of, so attention to detail is super important in aviation because you're doing checklists. And so if you're a person that isn't able to follow steps in a checklist, you probably shouldn't get into aviation right off the bat. But skipping things is not advisable because that leads to mistakes. But being able to compartmentalize emotion and be able to anticipate and react. I heard a really cool thing once. Are you familiar with the surfer Laird Hamilton, big wave surfer?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So in a lot of ways, flying a plane well is a lot like surfing a big wave. If you're, not, it's sort of like, I guess, in Top Gun, if you think you're dead, that's not really true. You have to think, but at the same time, you get in this sort of flow mode, reacting to what's going on around you in the environment, whether it be wind gusts, weather, uh, runway conditions, something the plane's doing, an emergency, where you're combining your central nervous reaction to a scenario with a lot of training in the background, where you're trained to have these conditioned responses to a given scenario. Like if I see a firelight, I don't freak out and go, firelight. I say, okay, we're about to lose that engine. We're still flying. Everybody, everything's cool. We're still flying, but I need to do these emergency procedures in this specific order to get the plane safely configured so that we can now shut the engine down and then go land. So that's something that you have to be able to compartmentalize your fear and think through fear. And that gets back to what I was talking to Jay about a little while ago with the basic training. That's why they want to stress you out. That's why they want to put you in stressful situation with a team, because you're going to be unbelievably stressed sometimes in this real world environment by things you can't control, and you have to be able to pull your training out of your brainstem and push back those initial responses of fear and breathe and perform.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Or that's one of the things I find very fascinating is, as I just don't understand how you can that, or how you can simulate that.
Yeah, I think that there's a certain amount you can simulate by putting as much stress as you can on a person in an aviation simulator, and the simulator has to be a real experience. They have to be able to have visuals and tactile. I've been in simulators that actually the whole simulator moves and shakes and does things, and there's other simulators that have um, air moving through the seats where it creates the feeling of G forces, even though the simulator's not moving at all. Like the seat, if you're pulling G's, the seat will sink down, and if you're unloading the plane and you're light in your seat, it'll inflate, and so you feel light in your seat. So it has to be this system, this
Is there,
man system interface that allows us to um,
and is there
feel that stress as much as possible.
is there some biomarker or something they can track to see if you can that they can correlate to see if you could then hack it in a real situation? Like, do
Well,
they?
I mean, they don't like hook you up to like a heart monitor or anything and
Yeah,
and say, well, you have to keep your heartbeat below 70 while you're falling out of the sky or something. But what they'll do is just evaluate you all along the way with stair stepped training continuums that test basic skills all the way up to advanced skills, and then they throw emergencies in there or battle situations or force you to think. And then there's live exercises that you do in aviation where the basic flying is sort of understood. We're past that now. Now we're going into a live scenario where people are if you're in the fighter world, it's you're fighting against other people that are in other planes, and you're simulating combat. And it's stressful in the sense that, like, when you're training, it's like playing a sports game. If either you played any sports, like field sports, where you're competing against another team, it's just like that. You take it seriously on
yeah,
the field, but it's not real.
right.
But it is stressful, and you can get hurt, or you can get um you can lose. And so and then we analyze that in the post debrief very carefully about, this is what you did, and this is and there's evaluations written, and you're graded,
Oh,
and
wow.
and qualifications are either awarded or not awarded based on how well you perform. So yeah.
Parts of that remind me of things that are involved in being a scientist. So essentially building up this confidence in the empirical data that underline the protocols
Mhm.
that allow you to navigate a situation. Like it's just this game of kind of building up your trust in what's come before you, and trust in
Mhm.
the knowledge that this scenario has been thought of before, and a way through it has been presented to you that is likely to work. And then you have to kind of have this balance between like faith in that navigation, faith in navigating that protocol. And then at the same time, you also have to have, I would imagine, a certain amount of flexibility to calmly deal with the situation if it looks like that protocol is not taking you in the right direction.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, definitely in the medical field, it could be relatable to students who are if you're in the operating room and suddenly a artery bursts, like, you can't suddenly just lose your nerve. Or if you're in a time critical experiment where you've got all the conditions set up, and the equipment we're all working right at the same time, and then you press the button to go. Like, you kind of have to be ready to do your thing, whether it's record the data or manipulate the data, so that the experiment can progress the way you want it to. It's very similar.
Yeah. I mean, that commitment to the protocols, commitment to being on top of the training, that never stops, right? I mean, you sent me some really cool photos of you
Yeah.
presumably in training underwater, jumping out of an
Yeah.
airplane. I think, can you speak a little to the point?
Yeah, so like
This never stops.
my very first carrier qualification in the Navy means you learn to land on the ship using the tail hook, where we don't flare to land and roll out on a long runway on an aircraft carrier. Um we actually stop very quickly using the wires that are the cross deck pennants, as we call them, going across the deck, and we have a little hook on the end of the plane that catches that wire and stops you quickly. And so the first time you do that is your carrier qualification, and you do it solo. You don't have an instructor with you in the plane. So you've practiced it at the field, simulating. To your point, Jay, we simulate it aircraft simulator, and then we simulate it at a regular runway with a little carrier box painted on the runway and some people on the ground grading your landings. But you don't actually do the thing you're going to do until you do it alone for the very first time, and that is crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, and
So
there's no co-pilot, right? It's you're by yourself.
no, you just have you have a lead aviator, a wingman, if you will, that's kind of watching you and talking to you. But after that, you're kind of left with just your training. So
And so
that's the only.
if you miss it, if you miss that, can you just pull it up and do it again, or are you and
Yeah, it's called a bolter, and you add power and go around. But there have been people that mess that up too. It's just a very dangerous environment, but your training has put you in a position where you've got all the skills, and you just have to sort of focus and trust that you can do it. And there's some parameters that we put on new, like the deck movement, like the ocean, the sea state can't be like crazy. So it has to be a fairly calm day, and it can't be too windy, and it can't be, everything has to be just right. But it's still, at the end of the day, you're landing on a big
yeah,
aircraft carrier, and it doesn't look that big when you're out there in the ocean. It actually looks really small. And so that was phenomenal to me, to think that I did that. I still remember, going around the landing pattern and then landing that first time, and you're just on brainstem. You're not thinking. You're surfing that big wave, and like you're making the corrections you're taught to, and you hear the voice in your headphones from the landing signal officer telling you to add power or little lineup corrections and stuff, and you react, but you're not like, you're not taking in the moment. You're literally just outside yourself almost. So, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so this commitment to training and protocol and having a prescription for how to navigate a situation, does that also extend to how you navigate social situations? Social situations in the sense of you being a manager of personnel, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think that's easier or harder in the military?
I think in some ways it's Rebecca will tell you, my wife will say, in some ways it's easier, because at the end of the day, people say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, and they do it. It's hard to get that anywhere else. When you give an order, you trust people will follow it. So there is that aspect of it, I think, that's a little easier. But there also is that aspect in when you're interacting with people, they really have to trust you. So you have to walk the walk. You can't just say one thing and do another. You have to be an actual practice what you preach, so to speak, when you do things. So if I'm not a person of integrity, I can't tell people to have integrity, and
Yeah.
that's I think challenging in some other industries or fields.
Oh, I think
Yeah,
it's completely challenging. And I think that's kind of where I was hoping you'd go with it. I think the capacity for somebody to be responsible on the job and to follow through and what they say they're going to do is it's actually quite fleeting. There are
yeah,
very
yeah.
few people that actually follow through with that, surprisingly. And I would think that that's a tremendous benefit of working with people that have to have that code of responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that old adage. It's like, hey, man, 90% of life's just showing up. It's true. It's like, being able to be a reliable person, and a person that other people can count on to be consistent is really a great thing. If you're around leaders that are Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, you never know what you're going to get based on the day, or they're inconsistent with how they care about you. It's really hard to motivate people in a military setting where there's lives at stake. And then you're not going to be a successful team in a different setting, in a business setting, or in a scientific setting, if people are sort of all in it for themselves and constantly trying to figure out where they fit in, or they're putting their guard up because they don't know what they're going to get from the person that's in charge.
I mean, you've recently retired, like a
Hmm.
year and a half ago, and I have some questions relating to that, but you've started a new career, more or less. I mean,
Yeah.
you're now a commercial pilot, and I find that amazing. This idea that you can start in the service and be so successful and spend, a considerable amount of your life there, and then move on and do something completely new and exciting. And that's just a real benefit to life in the military that I never conceived of. Like if you commit yourself early on, I mean, you can make what you want out of it, and that could include starting an entirely different career at age 50, which is amazing. You still have tons of life left.
Yep.
I mean, did you think about that early
Hopefully.
on? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, you know that the military will set you up when you're in that scenario, you feel like the military will set you up well from maybe a leadership perspective with something in business, or maybe it'll, if you have a skill such as doctor, lawyer, aviator, ship driver, whatever, there are a lot of applications. I mean, actually, a lot of nuclear officers go into managing nuclear power plants, because the Navy helped actually stand that field up with a lot of the safety practices and how to run a nuclear power plant, because we did it first in the submarine world with Admiral Rickover. But yeah, I think that, um, I prefer to say instead of retirement, I'm just transitioning. You transition from one focus in your life to the next, and that's one of the great things about that I would offer to people as they're looking to what they want to do in life. The first job you do will probably not be the job you do till the end of your life. In fact, most people tend to switch jobs. I think what they say, like at least twice, if not three times throughout their life. So it's pretty rare to stay with the same thing. I think, Jay, you mentioned, you dabbled quite a bit, and it's fascinating to get to move through different career aspects, and I look back at my time in the military probably the most, not so much just the excitement of flying planes around, but the people were just so high quality. I made a lot of really great friends, and just really, I call them like my Navy family. They're my second family, and you don't find that as much in commercial aviation, but it's neat that I have a skill that I can take into commercial aviation, and then, learn what it takes to be a commercial pilot, because it's very different actually from being a Navy pilot. You're not landing on carriers, it's like the Saturday Night Live episode with Iceman, the later years. That's actually very true. Like, you're not like, bogey 10 o'clock, it's a totally different focus. You're not mission oriented. It's all about safety first, 100% safety. Like, if it's not 100% safe, we don't go. Whereas that's not always the case in the military. Sometimes you have to go because your people are counting on you, even if the chips are against you. But
So I have
go ahead.
sorry to interrupt you, Sam, but just kind of some questions came to mind.
Yeah.
So this might be way off, but things that come to mind immediately is just the whole notion of going from flying with people who are in the military to now potentially, I assume you're primarily flying, your co-pilots are not military, or are they military?
Yeah, it's a big mix, but I would say a large portion of people have no military experience.
And,
They
and
flew
then,
for regional airlines, and that's a whole different, like they have to go spend 20 years. It's just like me. I mean, a lot of them spent 20, years to get 20 years of experience to be allowed to fly at the highest
but what,
levels of commercial aviation.
so a couple things. So then what I'm wondering about is what you nicely described earlier about going through the academy and all that, and you learn to think about the team and working together. I could imagine that these other pilots don't have that. So I don't know if necessarily the ego, like I could see it being very interesting where you run across a pilot who's very successful and maybe doesn't have that same mindset. Like they're kind
Uh-huh.
of themselves first. And then I had this funny thought of you interviewing to be a pilot, and then they're going through
Yeah.
your resume and like
Yeah.
they make you I don't know, that just kind of cracked me up to have them think testing out your qualifications. Like, did they make you fly a little plane? I don't know what they do for that.
Well, yeah, they do. I mean, the airline interview process is actually pretty intense, but I will say that I think you bring up an interesting point. Within each field, you also have different companies within each field and different styles. That each company has sort of its own corporate subculture, to be
Okay.
specific. And one of the reasons I chose Southwest Airlines, not to toot the horn of Southwest Airlines on the podcast, but we are known for being very fun and sort of family oriented, um, stewardship type of focus as a corporate culture. So whether we always achieve that at every different work group, whether it be executive leadership or the pilots or the various other work groups, is not always the case. But when you look to move into a field, sometimes choosing the right company can be very a big challenge. I mean, in the tech world, Google is very different from Apple. And I mean, you look at the two companies that you did startups. I mean, I'd be interested to know if there was some different culture going on there and what that's like, or what it grew into if it gets bigger from what you started. Did you lose your way, or did you get even better? It's a lot of that's a whole different aspect of the job hunt that is challenging. And I would encourage people to, as they look, it's not just the field you want to go into. It's also like, is this a good fit for me? Am I going to be happy here? And I looked at all the airlines, and that's kind of why I ended up at Southwest. Is that it felt like the best fit and probably the closest thing to what I'd experienced in the Navy. But I also had no illusions that it was going to have the same calling, if you will, that I experienced in the Navy. And a lot of vets have that problem, as we get so used to having that military team and the way things work, that when you get into the commercial world, the civilian world, as we call it, um, it can be a little disorienting, and you can get sort of disassociated from who you were if you're not careful. So I think for me, and I can only speak for my experience, one of the advantages I had with coming into commercial aviation late is I have a lot of really close friends and sounding boards and people that are just rocks in my life, that when I'm feeling unstable, in my footing about where my life is going, I've always got those people to call or reflect on, and they keep me very grounded, and that's a good thing. So that's probably the biggest piece of advice I'd have for anybody finding a career is don't do it at the expense of losing your friends, because that's probably your friends and family, because that's really the thing that keeps the wheels on the bus.
Tim, while we still have you, you kind of mentioned at the end there your family, and you have a beautiful family that's been very supportive and with you for a long
Thank you.
time. And I wonder if you could just kind of comment on balancing your family life and your life in the military. I know that is
Well,
probably a challenge, but it's also
yeah.
a source of growth as well. But
Yeah, well, the joke with Navy pilots is the call sign thing. You have a call sign that you use on the radio, so you don't use your real name. But our family call sign is Team Chaos, for a reason, and it's because we don't have it all figured out. It's always beautiful managed chaos, and we have four kids. My twins, Keely and Allie, and then Max, who we adopted from Ukraine, who's deaf, and my youngest daughter Ava. And that's a four-ring circus that Rebecca and I are always trying to manage, while at the time, me deploying in the Navy, going away for 6 and 8 months at a time and coming back, and she's trying to keep the home fires burning, and just everybody from killing each other. And now transitioning into later on in life, and this is part of what I was talking about, when you deal with different stages people are in. I have kids in college, I have kids finishing high school, and that's a very different thing from somebody just starting out in their career. Like, when I never thought that I'd have four kids when I was at the Naval Academy. So, but I wouldn't change that at all. I love that aspect, and that's part of the reason I chose this my second career after I got out of the Navy, was one that would allow me to balance even more my time, and watch my kids, take over the world. It's their turn. So
that's great.
yeah,
Have any of them shown an interest in flying?
it's funny. I was hoping one would, but they all like being when I've taken them up in planes and stuff, and they think it's a lot of fun. But they all they all get a little nervous about some of the pictures I've shown them or talked about, and they're like, I don't know if that's for me. So you
Yeah.
kind of have to have that little bit of a wild hair, I think, and be, an adventure. I don't know if it's like you have to be an adrenaline junkie, but you definitely have to have that spark. I think if Max could get past some of the FAA qualification issues with being deaf, I think he would definitely be a pilot in a heartbeat. So, or a circus performer or something. So, yeah.
Well, Sam, I don't want to take too much of your time, but I was wondering if you might be able to comment on one of the more memorable or formative flying experiences that you've had before we go. Something that sticks in your mind that you'll never forget.
Probably one of the coolest things I ever got to do. So the C-2 Greyhound, the plane I flew, was the cargo plane that lands on the carrier. It's actually the biggest plane that lands on the carrier in the air wing. 90-foot wide landing area, 85-foot wingspan. So there's not a lot of space for error there. And we would bring out everything from cargo to VIPs. It just depended on what we were doing in the day. And one time we got to bring out for a USO tour, which is where they bring out Uniform Services Organization brings out celebrities frequently, and it could be like a rock star or a movie star. And like Bob Hope came and talked to the World War II people. We had the Legends of Naval Aviation tour, and that included the Apollo astronauts. So I actually got to meet Neil Armstrong, Gene Cernan, and Jim Lovell, and fly them out to the carrier as their pilot. And just talking to them, was amazing. I mean, these people are living legends. Talking to the first man on the moon, the last man on the moon, Gene Cernan, and the guy that never made it, Jim Lovell, with Apollo 13. That was pretty humbling, and hearing all their stories and knowing you're kind of a part of that legacy, but at the same time you're like getting to experience it right next to these people was fascinating. So that was pretty cool. It was neat because they treated us like peers, because they all started out as Navy pilots and we're all part of that club. And it wasn't like you're in this sort of convention fan base thing. They were just talking to us like we were one of them. And it was pretty neat. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, in fact, sometimes I'd run into like guys like Bruce Willis or famous actors that I took out of the carrier, and they'd always kind of like sort of, hey, who's the coolest person you've ever flown out to the boat? And they're kind of sort of putting the, trying to reel you in to say, oh yeah, some movie star, and it's like, actually, I tell them the story about the Apollo 13 astronauts. It's like, oh yeah, that's really cool.
It's hard to top those guys.
Yeah, you're just an actor playing people. These guys are the real thing. So
Yeah.
Well, you're the real deal too. And
oh, thanks for that.
yeah. Thank you for taking the time, and thank you for your service. I mean, it's truly exceptional, and we in the country owe you a lot.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you too as well, and look forward to seeing your podcast develop.